Hi, I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander with Benchmark Income Group.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that I think is interesting. Hopefully, everyone else will too. We are going to talk about how easy is it to change your financial advisor.
Yeah. And I think this came from an article you read a couple days ago.
Yeah, Forbes actually just came out with an article about this, and I want to dig a little bit deeper, I think,
Yeah.
into some of these questions. I actually thought the article was pretty good. It talked about a lot of different things you should consider, and one of the first things that it talked about was cost. But I think before we get to cost, I think it makes sense to understand that there are different things that you can move and different things that you can leave behind when you change advisors. So let's talk about the investment side first. Do you want to take that, Eric, and then I'll take the insurance side?
Yeah, sure. So the neat thing about the investment market is, for the most part, and there's a couple of exceptions, most everything is pretty fungible, meaning you can hold whatever security you've got. Everybody will hold Apple. Everybody holds Google. Everybody holds Microsoft, right? You can hold most of the investments that you've got wherever you are. So if the new advisor prefers one brokerage firm or another, or one platform over another, fine. They can hold everything you want for the most part in either place.
Portable.
It's very, 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 very portable. Now, there's some things that don't move. If you've got some private investments, like let's say a private real estate investment trust, that's just something that they hold and you can't move it, you may be stuck with that for a little bit. There may be some dangling participles that don't come with it, right? But for the most part, everything moves. You just have to be careful in the move, that when you're moving accounts or when you're moving assets, one of the big things to take advantage of, or to take stock of, no pun intended there, is sort of what the tax impact is going to be whenever you make that move. You may want to hold on to something that, man, my granddad gave me GE stock when I was 10 and I'm never letting that baby go. All right, well, you need to lay that out, because you may not want that tax bill all at once.
Right. Well, I think that's a good thing to consider, because the tax treatment of the account is going to determine whether or not you have tax consequences during a move.
Right.
And then depending on how you move the account will impact that as well. You know, if you're talking about rolling over an IRA from one advisor to a new advisor, from a tax perspective, you're not going to have any consequences because of the wrapper that those investments are held in. But if you have a non-qualified account, or like a traditional brokerage account, if you think about it that way, money that you've put in after taxes just to a traditional type of investment account, when that moves over, if everything moves over in kind, meaning it stays in exactly the same investments, then you're fine, no tax consequences. But the moment there is a liquidation or a trade, that's when you're really going to need to start factoring in, okay, am I going to have to pay some taxes I wasn't expecting if I move this account over? And the advisor that you are moving to should do a comprehensive analysis of expectation for that move.
Yeah, and it's really easy to manage. And so we've done this 100 times, where we're moving over an account, and man, there's $1 million in there, whatever the number is, and we don't want to sell that and have a bunch of taxes all at once. And so an easy way to go do that is what Mary talked about, moving in kind, just picking all of the money up and moving it over, but don't sell anything. And then you get to be more strategic when it's at the new location. Let's sell a little bit of this off at a time and kind of stretch out that tax impact.
To make sure you're doing it you could spread it over a series of years, even if you wanted to, especially if you're making a move towards the end of the year. It becomes very easy to make some of the trades in December and some of the trades in January. So let's talk about the insurance side for a second, because frequently this comes up. I actually had a client recently who told me they were really excited about everything I said and that they wanted to hire me and come on board, but they have a long-standing relationship with a previous advisor who is a close family friend. And so they were very concerned about the personal impact of making a switch.
Right.
And this is where I think it's important to know that you don't have to move everything depending on the type of advisor you're moving to. So what we agreed is that our firm would build the strategic side of the plan, and the existing advisor would continue to manage both the investments and the insurance. So
Right.
nothing is disrupting the income that the existing advisor is making, but now they're adding strategy that they weren't previously getting. And so that's maybe not something all advisors would be willing to do. But if you ask, you might be surprised at how many advisors would, because there's a difference between someone who is an investment advisor or an insurance agent and
Right.
someone who is actually building a strategic retirement income plan. Those are two different things. And we may all call ourselves financial advisors, but that doesn't mean we do the same thing.
Yeah, the
So on the
focus could be
insurance,
very different.
right. And so on the insurance side of things, sometimes it does make sense to move from an existing insurance contract into a new one. That could happen if you've had a major health improvement from the past time you went through an underwriting process, or it could make more sense that maybe you bought a policy that is not the best policy for you and your circumstance. And so it might make sense for you to consider a new one. But in a lot of circumstances, it doesn't make sense for you to move the insurance because, generally speaking, the cost of the insurance is front loaded into the first several years of the contract.
Right.
And so making a move means that you are re-entering the cost phase of the heavy cost phase of an insurance contract. And that might not be in your best interest. And so even if you said, look, I don't care who's servicing this, I just want to make sure the new advisor has access to it, you can do something called a change of servicing agent,
Right.
so that your new advisor can service your existing policy. And what's really interesting about doing that is that with most companies, when you change the servicing contract, it does not impact the original writing agent's income. That income does not get transferred over to the new advisor. And so sometimes advisors aren't willing to do this because they aren't getting paid. But if they're really paying attention to what's in your best interests, they should be willing to do that if you have a really high quality contract that you should hold on to. So that's just something to know about how all of that can move. Generally, it doesn't, as long as the advisor is licensed through a particular company, and it's pretty easy. You just fill out some paperwork. They should be able to service existing insurance coverages.
And the one caveat on that I think is worth noting is when you bought it and you bought it 4 or 5 years ago, and it's maybe not the best contract, but maybe you get a better health rating at the new place or it's the better system. Also understand that when you move it over, you're also 5 years older. And so some of those upfront costs are going to be a little bit different when you're older.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point. So what is the process of changing advisors, Eric?
Yeah, the process it really depends on what you're moving. And so I'm going to talk about the investment stuff first because it's really the easiest. The investment paperwork and the investment move over is just paperwork. Hey, I've got this new account at XYZ, closing out the account at ABC. There's a little transfer form that we send in the middle of it, and all the money sucks out of one spot and dumps into the other. And for 80 to 90% of the things you're going to go do, it's about that simple. And so it's a really easy process. And Mary and I had this conversation earlier today. Sometimes you have the conversation with the original advisor, and sometimes you don't. But
Depends on what terms you're on.
Right. But the two institutions don't care. If the one institution sees the transfer paperwork, they'll call the other one up, port the money over, and, Bob's your uncle, you're done.
So how long does that process usually take? Because I think sometimes people assume it's going to be instantaneous, and frequently it's not.
Yeah, frequently it's not. Every once in a while you get lucky and it's really fast. But for the most part, it's usually a 2 to 3 week process. You got to go set the account up at the new spot. So you got to get account numbers and all that kind of jazz set up. And then there's this paperwork that flows over to the other spot. And this is where the institutions tend to play what I call stupid games. And they hold on to the money for the maximum amount of time that they can hold on to it, even if it's still just sitting in cash. And then they slowly write that check. And then I think it goes on a horse, and then the horse rides across the country.
It's a turtle.
Maybe it's a turtle, and the turtle rides across the country to give it to the other agency.
Well, and I think this is good to know, because if you're expecting instantaneous transfers, this is not Venmo, where you just push a button and it leaves your account and shows up in somebody else's account. And in this day and age, in this day and age of instant gratification, I think it's important to have a clear expectation of how long the process actually takes. And some of that is because a lot of companies still require a wet signature. Some will
Right.
do everything electronically, some require a wet signature, but whatever you
Or
do, it
medallions.
typically, yeah, yeah. So if you think about what happens, the paperwork, whether it's electronic or through the mail, has to go from your advisor's office to wherever their broker dealer or RIA's home office is. Then those compliance people are going to look at it. Then they're going to send it on. And so all of these different compliance departments has to look at it, check it, make sure everything is done just the way it's supposed to be. And if anything was missed on a form, it could be something very, very small. You forgot to check a box that said, oh, my income is between this amount and this amount. The paperwork will come back not in good order, and then you'll have to redo it and then do it again. And so some of that stuff can take a lot longer than I think people are expecting. On the insurance side of things, if you are re-underwriting and you're opening a new policy, that process can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days, sometimes even longer than that, depending on the insurance company that you're applying with. The reason for that is that not only do you have to fill out the application, but you have to do a medical exam, and then the insurance company is going to pull records probably from any doctor you've seen in the past 5 to 10 years. And so then the doctor's offices have to send that in. Then an underwriter looks at it. They come back and say the pricing, and then you get to whether or not you want to finalize all of that. So that process can be very lengthy if you are changing insurance as part of the process or even adding new coverage. But if you look at a change of servicing agent form, typically that can be done anywhere from 24 hours to 5 business days on the outside. So that one happens pretty quickly if that's something that you're interested in doing. And I liked your question about the breakup, Eric, because this is where, clients are like, do I have to tell them? I like it when people tell me if they're going to leave, because it gives me the opportunity to say, are you sure? But I think also it is, I like to see how people leave their existing advisor, because I can make the assumption that if eventually they made a decision to leave to go to a different advisor other than me, that they'll probably leave the same way. And so I think giving the other advisor the respect of saying, hey, this isn't working, I'm moving, here's why, is huge. But if you're a conflict avoider and you don't want to have that conversation, you generally don't have to, because once you sign paperwork at the new company, like Eric said earlier, it sort of happens automatically between brokers or between RIAs, and the advisor doesn't need to get involved.
Right. And I think it really goes back to that idea. And as the advisor, I don't want to hear the information, but as the advisor, I want to also hear the information, because then it helps me get better. But we've had it go both ways, right? And we've seen, I don't think every conceivable breakup scenario there probably is at this point, but it happens very differently in different places. One thing to note is on the insurance side, if you do sign up for new insurance, you're going to go into the underwriting process to get new insurance. They will tell the other company that you're shopping, and that information will go directly to the existing insurance agent. So whether you wanted to have that conversation or not, you're going to have that conversation, and you're going to know. On the investment side, it's just paperwork, and the advisor looks at their account and goes, where did Bob's paperwork? Where did Bob's money go? Right. It kind of happens like that. So
yeah, that's a good point about the insurance. So in the insurance industry, the way the regulations are set up, if you are considering replacing an existing policy, on the application for a new policy, you have to check that box and sign it. And when you check that box, it triggers a legal requirement for the new insurance company to send a letter to the old insurance company that says, hey, Sally is considering replacing the insurance coverage that she has with you. Generally speaking, that notice will then go to the agent who is the current servicing agent on the policy, and that will trigger them calling you to say, hey, what are you doing? Where are you going? Why are you doing that? And I do think that's a surprise to a lot of people. They don't realize that. And then they get a call out of the blue and they're like, how did you know I was doing that? Are you stalking me? But it's actually a regulatory procedure.
Right. And I think the other end of it is always a tough conversation, because everyone wants what their best interests are, I guess is the right way to say it.
Yes.
The old advisor's like, no, that new person is totally the devil.
Sure.
Here's what's going on. Here's why that's bad. The new one is saying, no, that old person is the devil, right? So there's some conflict that's going to naturally happen in the middle of it as everyone is trying to sort of re-earn your business at that point.
Right. I guess the thing I would say is if they're trying to re-earn your business when you're leaving, as opposed to constantly earning it while you're the client, that in and of itself is a red flag,
For sure.
in my opinion.
For sure.
So,
and then you mentioned, and I think we've got a couple minutes left.
Sure.
What questions would you, if you're in the process of moving and you're like, yeah, I don't know whether the breakup makes sense. I'm not sure whether to go to this new person or stay with the person I'm at now. What are some of the questions that you would ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I would want to know if I was talking to a potential new advisor is, do I have to move to even have this conversation? You know, I would want to see,
question.
I would want to see, here's what the plan is. Here's why it makes sense for me. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the timeline. I would want that whole process mapped out before I made a decision to move. And so I would want to be sure that that initial discovery conversation did not create a requirement for me to move.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've been with an advisor for a while, making sure that you're moving to a new advisor that you really have vetted and like, I feel like this is not a decision that should be made lightly. And so for me, some of the things that I think are incredibly important questions to ask, if your advisor, the new one, is not asking you what your hopes and dreams are, I think something is missing. And that to me is a problem with this industry in general, because a lot of times it's just, I put some numbers in a calculator and here's a plan for you.
Right.
But the reality is money is just a tool and it's meant to help you build a life that you're excited to live. I mean, how many times have you heard me say that? I say that over and over and over again. Well, if I'm going to use a tool to build something, shouldn't I know what I'm building as an advisor?
Right.
And so if your advisor is not asking, what do you want? If there were no limits, what would you do? And then finding ways to help facilitate that, I might be hesitant to move.
Yeah. And I think another great question along that line is, what are you scared of? Like there's a reason at a fundamental sort of existential level, like spiders, maybe you don't have to have that conversation, but what are
don't.
you, I know, I thought about you last night. We were at dinner and there was a giant spider, like
Nope.
felt like it was 2 inches big. And I thought Mary would be freaking out. But like, what are you afraid of for the future? Is it, dying alone next to a bunch of cats under a bridge? Or is it that I don't get to see my kids as much? Or, like what is driving not just the dreams and aspirations, but what's that pebble in your shoe that's kind of annoying you? And I think the other follow-up question is being honest with that new person about, here's why I'm leaving, or here's why I'm thinking about leaving. Because then you teach them how to treat you.
Right. Well, and I can say that as an advisor, one of the questions I want an answer to is if I were to call your current advisor and ask them what they thought of you as a client, what would they tell me? And that may seem like kind of a weird question to ask, but if you had a great relationship with the advisor and you're really just leaving because they can't do something that you need done, or they won't do something that you need done, that's very different than if you're leaving because you call and yell at them all the time and, they stop taking your phone calls. I mean, I think to me, this relationship should be a two-sided street, because your advisor, I mean, I think about the role of an advisor, and maybe this is my ego talking, but I also think it's true. A doctor has the ability to impact your health, which really, really impacts quality of life. If you think about somebody, whether it's a pastor or a rabbi or, somebody on the spiritual side of things, they have the ability to really impact your quality of life because they're talking about mindset and your relationship to the world as a whole. But I also think that an advisor has the ability to really impact your quality of life. So making sure that you have an advisor that you trust on two counts: one, integrity, and two, knowledge. And I say that because just this morning we were teaching a class to our advisors, and we broke out a couple of products right next to each other. And we said, how does this actually work? And how does it impact the financial plan? And what assumptions are they using? And it was fascinating because at the end of it, the advisor who had brought in the illustrations for what we were looking at said, I don't understand why my friend, who seems like an ethical person, would sell this.
Right.
And the answer isn't about ethics, it's about education at that point. And, that's where I would just say you cannot abdicate your responsibility in this process. I think that's actually true in healthcare nowadays too. I think that's such a hard industry to navigate, but you have to be your own advocate. You cannot abdicate the responsibility for your financial plan to any advisor. And I would say that actually would include Eric and myself.
Sure.
This should be a partnership where you are working together hand in hand to help create a life that you're really excited about. And if you don't feel like you're getting that from your advisor, I would say it is time to consider perhaps there should be a change. And now you know how difficult and or easy it might be.
Well, and it reminds me of a conversation you and I had last week, and we can close out on this, is the clients are like, I don't know. I trust you, just do it. And it feels great in the moment, like, oh, wow, they trust me. But I'm like, wait, stop. No, you have to know this. You have to understand what we're doing. And the funnest conversations we get to have, and I've gotten to have probably 4 or 5 of those over the last couple of weeks, is where the client and I get to sit down and we're almost co-creating the plan together.
Mm-hmm.
And like, here are the rules, here's what's going on, here's the levers. What are you thinking? I want to do this. I'm like, all right, you can do that, but here's what's going to happen. And they're like, okay, well, what if we did this? And it's a fun sort of give and take and back and forth on sort of creating that plan. And when we get to the end of it, I haven't done anything other than just be like the bumpers on the, okay, here's how reality works, and here's what's going on. You can do anything within these bumpers, and here's why you would want to do one versus the other. And the client gets to sort of be a part of that process. And it's so entertaining and so fun to kind of be a part of that. And for me, when I'm thinking through that, you need to have that level of engagement with the person that's managing your money. You can sit down and go, I've been thinking about this. What do you think?
Yes.
You want to have that conversation.
100%. And it's the advisor's job to do all the math for you and to give you the information so that you can make better decisions, right? Your advisor should take the approach of that it's our job as advisors to show you what's possible, but it's your job to tell us what you actually want to do. And that's why it's important. Even if you don't know how to build a watch, you need to be able to tell time, and you need to be able to tell if the watch is working.
Right.
That to me is key. You need to at least be able, if you went home and said, here's what I'm doing, you need to be able to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why you're not choosing some of the other options. And if you can't do that, my advice would be to spend more time on that plan to make sure that you get it, because this is probably the hardest part of adulting, right? But if you're going to work so hard to make your money, it should be working really hard for you. And you've got to manage that almost as if it was an employee.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually a great way to go put that. That's a great way to end, actually. Yeah.
Mic drop, I'm out.
I can only make this worse by talking more.
Where can they find you, Eric?
I'm Economics with Eric, everywhere you use social media.
And I am at The Wealth Woman. We'll see you next time.
See ya.